Ethan Marshall had been on the brink of the interview he'd prepared for his entire life until a single moment changed everything. He almost didn't look up until he heard a sudden thud behind Gate 7. Ethan stood in the queue at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, his heart pounding at 68 degrees beneath the fluorescent glare. He checked the time on his watch, 7:45 a.m. Pacific. His boarding pass was tucked into the inside pocket of his navy sport coat, and in his left hand he clutched a sleek leather portfolio, its pages pristine, with weeks of technical notes for the federal engineering role in Seattle. Every detail of that interview replayed in his mind the exact diesel engine specifications he'd memorized, the structural load diagrams he'd refined, the three projects he'd led at his last firm. This was the opportunity he had chased for years. The terminal smelled of stale coffee and new carpet. A soft ding sounded each time someone passed through the scanner ahead of him. Cell phones buzzed with final call reminders. Gate 7's overhead display flickered. Final call for flight. 312 to Tacoma. Please proceed to boarding. Ethan inhaled, tasting the acrid residue of burnt coffee still on his tongue. His phone vibrated again, but he ignored it, focusing on the small digital clock above the glass doors leading to the jet bridge. Then came the sound, not a call for boarding, not a scream, but a dull thump like a folding chair collapsing. It came from the seating area just beyond the scanner. People glanced over, one woman gasped, and then returned to scrolling her feed. Two college students nudged each other, awkward smiles twisting their faces. Everyone looked away as if they'd seen nothing more than a forgotten suitcase falling. Ethan's instincts surged. Without conscious thought, he stepped out of line, leaving his portfolio and boarding pass behind for the TSA officer to scan. His shoes clicked sharply on the polished terrazzo floor as he crossed the 20 yards to the nearest row of chairs. There, slumped sideways across two seats, was an older man with silver hair matted to his forehead. His windbreaker, an olive green shell, was stained at the shoulder. His right hand clutched something against his chest, a small leather case from which a silver dog tag peeked out. Sir Ethan whispered, kneeling beside him. The man's eyes fluttered open, gray and clear, but his breath came in ragged bursts. The leather case pressed into Ethan's thigh. Its clasp was worn as though it had passed through many hands over many years. No one else moved. The boarding ramp beyond the glass stood empty. Gate 7 agents exchanged glances but said nothing. 20 feet away, a hushed murmur of tires and distant rolling suitcases filled the space. Time warped, Ethan felt as though he'd left one world behind and entered another where everything paused. He took off his sport coat and folded it beneath the man's head. The fabric spread like a cushion, its crisp lines breaking against the man's sweat-damp hair. Ethan touched the man's shoulder, lightly steadying him. "Medical," he called out, voice calm but firm. A passing attendant, a woman in a white polo and navy slacks, looked up, then hurried off toward the staff room with determined strides. The old man's hand trembled around the leather case. Ethan noticed a faint engraving on the edge of the dog tag, a string of numbers, perhaps a serial code, and beneath it a single word blacked out now. Ethan's pulse raced. He glanced back at Gate 7. The scanner belt was empty. His group had vanished through the gate. The final call announcement repeated, a tinny voice echoing, "Last call for Flight 312. Ethan swallowed. He hadn't told his parents he might reach this level. He'd skipped dinner last night to polish his shoes, and his savings had all gone toward this relocation. None of it mattered. He stayed. Minutes passed. The man's breathing steadied, though shallow. Ethan kept one hand on the man's shoulder, and with the other reached for the fallen case, lifting it from the crimson terminal carpet. He closed the clasp and set it gently on the seat beside them. The symbol felt heavy, like a life's worth of unspoken stories pressed into a sliver of steel. Finally, the man spoke, voice gravel dry. "You don't—" He paused, blinking. "You don't have to miss it." He meant the flight. Ethan offered a small, surprised smile. "Flights depart every hour," he said. The man's shoulders relaxed as though a weight had been lifted from deep inside. Ethan didn't say he'd kept that portfolio close for weeks, or that he dreaded the moment he might fail. He just stayed. The terminal buzz around them dimmed further. Suitcases wheeled down distant corridors. Conversations in the cafe. Hush whispered overhead announcements moved on to other gates. But here at Gate 7, only Ethan and the stranger remained. A medical team arrived at last, two attendants, wheeling a gurney, a third carrying oxygen. They knelt and began checking the man's vitals, but the veteran held up a hand. "No ambulance," he said, voice stronger now, the command unmistakable. One medic hesitated, then nodded, pressing a nasal cannula under his nose. The other stepped back to confer quietly. Ethan watched from the side, heart tight in his chest. No sirens, no flash of lights, just hushed efficiency. The man looked at Ethan, his pale gray eyes steady. "Most people don't want to see us anymore," he said softly, pressing the dog tag to his lips. "They remind themselves of what they didn't do." Ethan swallowed again. He didn't flinch. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder, steady and sure. "I did." The man closed his eyes as if recalling something distant. A promise made beneath barbed wire, a comrade's whisper in a foxhole, a last salute at sunset. The leather case lay open now, the dog tag shining quietly under the harsh terminal lights. Ethan Marshall remained kneeling beside that stranger long after he had missed Flight 312. He didn't know what the next hour held, whether the general heaping from distant orders would ever arrive, whether the world beyond this airport would change. But he knew with absolute certainty that he had boarded the right moment. As he stood folding his sport coat and tucking it over his arm, he cast one more look at the dog tag. It was the first time he had truly seen it. And in that instant, the line between strangers had vanished, leaving two men bound by something neither had expected. He rose from the floor, heart still racing, as the terminal lights overhead seemed to pulse in time, with his breath an unspoken invitation to what lay ahead. Ethan Marshall knelt beside the veteran until the medical team steadied him, and though he'd missed Flight 312, he stayed. Now, with the elderly man settled into a wheelchair at a quiet corner of concourse, Ethan felt the weight of every empty seat around them. The terminal lights glowed softly at 6:15 a.m. Pacific, but the atmosphere had shifted. Flight announcements, once urgent, now washed over the crowd with muted indifference. A woman 2 rows back tapped away on her phone, the sharp clicks echoing like raindrops as she watched a live stream captioned, "Crazy scene at Gate 7. Guy faints, crowd just watches." Nearby, 2 teenagers scrolled through a video someone had already posted with the hashtag #SureVetDrama, snickering at comments like, "Bet he's just looking for attention and security should have tossed him out." Their laughter was nervous, tinged with guilt, as if they sensed they were mocking a man in need. Ethan winced at the digital mocking. He glanced over at the veteran Edric Hale as a hastily scribbled name tag revealed leaning forward in his wheelchair, jaw clenched. The small leather case, now strapped to the side of the chair, caught the glow of the overhead fixtures. Its steel dog tag bore faint scratches, but shone with purpose. It was the one constant through the indifference, a quiet symbol that bound them both. Edric's thinning silver hair clung to his sweaty brow. His windbreaker hung loosely around his frame, olive green in the dim light, the fabric softened from years of wear. His dark slacks were pressed but frayed at the hems. He hadn't spoken since giving his final order to refuse ambulance transport. Ethan watched him inhale and exhale, each breath measured and deliberate. "Are you cold?" Ethan asked softly, pulling his sport coat tighter around Edric's shoulders. The early morning chill still seeped through the terminal's glass panes, though the HVAC vents had warmed to a comfortable 70 degrees. Edric shook his head. His gray eyes flicked toward the departure board, which now scrolled through a dozen flights without mention of Gate 7. He seemed to be measuring something unseen, assessing the emptiness of the concourse as though it were a battlefield after retreat. "People keep moving," Edric murmured. His voice was low-laced with something like sorrow. "They remind themselves of what they didn't do." Ethan swallowed. He remembered how moments ago the man's grip on the dog tag had loosened for the first time. The gesture stayed with him now, the tag's passive clink against the leather, like a heart beating softly. Across the aisle, a bored gate agent in navy slacks and a white polo shirt leaned against a counter scrolling through her phone. Ethan caught a glimpse of her screen. A headline on the airport's unofficial Snapchat story read, "Morning chaos at C0 Heroes." Gate 7 fail. A pang of anger rose in him. He thought of what Edric must have endured to earn that tag, only to be reduced now to viral ridicule. Ethan cleared his throat. "Edric, what did this mean to you?" He pointed to the dog tag. Edric looked down at it, his fingers brushing the cold steel. He closed his eyes for a moment and inhaled deeply as though gathering a memory. It was given to me by Sergeant Calloway in '68 on the banks of the Mekong River, he said quietly. The ambient sounds of rolling suitcases and distant announcements faded in the cadence of his memory. We were pinned down. The monsoon had turned the earth to mud up to our knees. It rained for days. Calloway slipped me that tag, said if he didn't make it, I'd carry his name home. Ethan listened, picturing green water lapping at rice paddies, the buzz of cicadas replaced by the hum of military helicopters overhead. He could almost feel the damp heat and smell the exhaust of C-130s. The terminal around them dissolved. When he was hit and I thought I'd lost him, Edric continued, voice tight. I held on to that tag. It was the only thing that kept me moving. He opened his eyes clear and unwavering. But people in line at Gate 7 don't know about any of that. They only saw a man collapse. Ethan nodded, understanding how isolation could cut deeper than injury. They didn't see you, he said softly. They saw inconvenience. Edric gave a wan smile, one that didn't quite meet his eyes. Most people don't want to see us anymore, he repeated. We remind them of what they didn't do. Ethan shifted in his seat, the vinyl cushion creaking under his weight. Around them, the terminal's social hum continued, though the tone had changed. An airport employee droned into a megaphone, travelers for Flight 409 to Boise, please. Proceed to Gate C3, as if that announcement could erase what had just happened. A family of 4 walked past, luggage in tow, little children peeking back curiously, but pulled along by impatient parents. Then Ethan's phone vibrated. He glanced down a notification from Twitter, a clip of him kneeling beside Edric captioned, "Finally one guy who cares. One stand-up." The contrast between Chashi Gate 7 fail and stand-up felt like two sides of the same coin. He scrolled through the replies, some praising his action, others questioning his priorities. What about his own dreams, one read. He'll miss a big opportunity. Ethan locked his phone. I don't regret it, he said, looking back at Edric. Sometimes standing still is the only way to move forward. Edric's gaze softened. You stayed, he said simply. That matters. Ethan leaned forward. Tell me about the night before your discharge, he invited, wanting to bridge the gulf between them. The final echo of social media fades in importance beside the rawness of Edric's story. Edric inhaled again, letting out a breath that sounded like release. I walked across the Hugh City Bridge at dusk, the one on Highway 15, he began. I laid a wreath for those we lost, and I left that tag there. Then I assumed no one would ever ask for it back. Ethan pictured the bridge stretching across the Perfume River, the skyline of central Vietnam, dim against an orange sky. He could feel the humid breeze on his face. The terminal's artificial light became a distant echo. Around them, cell phone cameras popped up a new round of live clips, this time capturing Edric's story word for word. View counts climbed 2,000, 5,000, $10,000. Some viewers typed, "Wash your forgotten heroes." Others shared the location coordinates of Hugh City Bridge, pledging to visit. A small wave of empathy formed online like a rising tide. Ethan recognized the shift. The same crowd that had laughed at a collapsed man was now pausing to listen. He watched Edric's jaw unclench, his posture easing as the world began to notice again, this time not as a spectacle, but as a story. Edric closed his eyes as though crossing from one world to another. I thought no one cared anymore, he said softly. But maybe they do in their own way. Ethan reached out, placing both hands on Edric's shoulders. They will, he promised. You'll see. As the terminal lights dimmed into mid-morning brightness, Ethan felt the air shift once more, weightful with remembrance and understanding. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring for Edric, for his own delayed career, or for everyone watching on screens thousands of miles away. But in that moment of shared vulnerability, two men found something they'd forgotten, that no one has to do heroic things to be worth noticing. And as the Twitter feed swelled with Hawkins' shush of forgotten heroes, Ethan wondered what it would take to move from viral attention to lasting respect, and who would have the courage to lead the way. Ethan Marshall had stood by Edric's side through the indifference of Gate 7, and as cameras clicked and social feeds shifted, a new wave of attention began to build. Now, 2 hours later, the terminal was stirring with an entirely different energy, one of genuine respect. The morning light filtered through the high windows of Concourse, casting long shafts of brightness across the thrumming rows of seats. It was 9:02 a.m. Pacific, and the ambient temperature hovered comfortably around 72 degrees Celsius. Flight announcements had given way to an unusual hush, broken only by the distant hum of cleaning carts and the soft murmur of voices drawn to a single point near the old man's wheelchair. Black-suited agents flanked the polished marble floor, but they moved with discretion rather than force, as though preserving a fragile moment. Edric Hale sat upright now, the olive-green windbreaker neatly draped over the wheelchair's back. The small leather case with its silver dog tag rested on his lap. Around him, travelers paused, not scrolling their phones in derision, but holding them aloft to record something extraordinary. On one screen, a live streamer's caption read, "We're witnessing something I never thought I'd see, a four-star general here to honor a vet who collapsed alone. Honor Edric." The hashtag flickered across multiple feeds, each retweeted and shared in real time. Ethan glanced at his own phone. Nauyar Gate 7 fail had been replaced almost entirely by Nauyar Honor Edric Yapakorn Unseen Valor in Heroes Among Us. A low murmur of footsteps approached. Gate 7 agents pressed their uniform, straightening collars as they stepped back respectfully. Even the two college students who had laughed earlier now stood quietly, faces softened by remorse. One of them, a young woman in a red hoodie, met Ethan's eye and offered a small apologetic nod before ducking her head. Then the terminal doors slid open at the far end of the concourse. 6 glossy SUVs rolled in their dark blue paint, catching the morning light. They eased to a silent stop behind a velvet rope that had sprung up without warning, held taut by plainclothes officers. A short distance ahead, a 4-star general strode forward, his silver hair trimmed neatly, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders like distant beacons. He wore a crisp navy blue uniform in which every ribbon and medal sat squared and level, each one polished to a mirror finish. The general paused beside Edric and Ethan. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still itself, the only sound the soft click of camera shutters. Then, without fanfare, the general dropped to one knee directly in front of the veteran. His salute was flawless, elbow-angled precisely, fingers brushing the brim of an invisible cap. Terminal lights winked off and on overhead like applause. Tears sprang to the eyes of a gate agent standing nearby, and a ripple of sniffles moved through the gathered crowd. Edric's breath caught. His hand drifted to the dog-tag fingertips, brushing the cold steel. He looked at the general, then at Ethan, and all at once the years of solitude and neglect seemed to pour out in a single exhalation. Ethan's chest tightened as he watched a man hardened by war become a symbol for a nation's conscience. A hush settled as the general rose and spoke, his voice carrying easily through the open space. "Seaman First Class Edward Edric. Hail, he began your service in Vietnam, saved countless lives. Your courage under fire, your duty to your brothers, and your steadfast refusal to seek recognition have not gone unnoticed." His words were measured, each phrase resonating like a tolling bell. "Today we salute you." The crowd broke into applause that started softly before swelling into a wave of sound that rolled down the concourse. Phones lowered and dozens of travelers removed hats, pressing hands over hearts. On the departure board above, scrolling text was overridden with a special announcement honoring ceremony Seaman First Class Edward Hale, 9:10 a.m. at Gate 7. All travelers and staff invited. Even Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He stood to the side, the edges of his sport coat brushing the polished floor, feeling both invisible and infinitely important. The young woman in the red hoodie approached him, hesitating. "I am sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I laughed. I didn't know." Her eyes brimmed with tears. Ethan offered a gentle nod. "You saw now," he said, "and that's what matters." She gathered herself, stepped forward toward Edric, and placed a handmade card on the armrest of his wheelchair. The card's front bore a watercolor of an American flag waving in the breeze. Inside, a simple message: "Thank you. We see you." As the applause tapered, cameras refocused on Edric. A TSA supervisor, the same woman who'd radioed in earlier, approached with a crisp envelope. She knelt beside him, slid the envelope into his windbreaker pocket, and rose without a word. Edric's eyes flicked to the emblem on its flap, the official seal of the U.S. Navy. He glanced at Ethan as though seeking assurance that this moment was real. It was. Even the flight schedules were reconfigured to display tribute messages for the next 30 minutes. Boarding delayed for honoring ceremony declared one line, another reading flight 515 to Portland will now depart at 10:00 a.m. Thank you for your patience. Every gate agent, uniformed and plainclothes alike, bowed their heads as a brief bugle call rose on the airport's PA system. The mournful notes of taps filled the concourse, echoing against the glass ceiling. Ethan felt the weight of history pressing gently on his shoulders. He looked at Edric, whose hands lay folded in his lap. The dog tag caught the afternoon glow like a beacon, and for a moment Edric closed his eyes in gratitude. When he opened them again, they shone with quiet tears of remembrance. The bugle call ended, and the general stepped forward once more. He spoke not to any microphone but directly to Edric so that only those within arm's reach could hear. You refused our medals. You turned down our ceremonies. But today, sir, we insisted. Your service demands recognition, whether you seek it or not. Edric's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. I only wanted to remember them, he replied, voice thick. But you remembered me instead. The general reached out and clasped Edric's hand, then turned and addressed the crowd. Let this be a reminder, no act of service is too small to honor, no life too quiet to matter. A cheer rose, not loud or brash, but heartfelt. Parents wiped tears from children's eyes, business travelers clasped hands with neighbors, and even the two college students linked arms to catch each other's gaze. Social media feeds exploded with Arsh honor Edric, just your unseen valor and heroes among us. The comments now filled with pledges to volunteer at veterans centers and donations to memorial funds. One by one, strangers approached Edric, pressing coins or small folded flags into his hands, heralds of collective gratitude. Amid the warmth of the moment, Ethan felt a subtle tug on his arm. He turned to see the gate agent who'd offered him the boarding pass. She handed him a second envelope, smaller navy blue, sealed with a gold star. He pocketed it, puzzled, and watched as she stepped back into the formation of uniformed staff who now flanked Edric like guardians. The ceremony wound down as gently as it had begun. The general saluted one final time, then signaled to his officers. The black SUVs reassembled their engines, whispering to life. Edric rose from his wheelchair, leaning on the general's arm for support, and began the slow walk toward the exit doors. Ethan fell in step beside them, each of them framed by the wide glass panes that looked out onto the rain-slicked tarmac. As they passed under the velvet rope, Edric paused and looked back at the concourse. The hush of reverence had given way to renewed activity, gates calling, passengers, wheeled luggage rattling over tiles, and distant conversations filled with shared wonder. He turned to Ethan and offered a small nod, a gesture of thanks, of trust, of understanding that this moment would echo long after they left. And as the door to the ramp slid closed behind them, the hashtag Nash standby them flickered across every departing screen, a final salute that would carry the story of one simple act of kindness well into the quiet days to come. Ethan Marshall had watched Edric Hale rise from his wheelchair, flanked by a four-star general and a formation of silent stewards, and had felt the reverberations of that day echo through the concourse. Now, 6 months later, he stood once more in Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, this time at Gate 15, where a different kind of ceremony was about to begin. The terminal clock glowed 8:30 a.m. Pacific, and the air held a crisp 68 degrees. A small crowd had gathered beneath a banner reading Edric Hale Veterans Heritage Corner, strung between two polished steel posts. Beneath it, a triangular display case stood atop a simple wooden pedestal carved from Alaskan cedar. Inside lay Edric's folded flag, its 13 triangular folds still sharp and precise, and beside it the two bronze challenge coins, one inscribed, "When no one is watching," the other, "You stand anyway." A small engraved plaque read, "In honor of Seaman First Class Edward Hale, U.S. in 1946-2024. His silence spoke so that others might be heard. Ethan wore his Navy sport coat without the leather portfolio. This time he'd long since traded engineering specs for coordinating the new Veterans Outreach Initiative at SeaTac. He checked his watch, 8:32 a.m. He'd arrived early to greet guests. The legacy project he'd helped launch was the airport's first permanent veterans tribute, complete with an interactive kiosk where travelers could listen to Edric's recollections of Hugh City Bridge in the cracked voice behind taps in Concourse A. At exactly 8:35 a.m., Admiral Caroline Ruiz retired 2 stars on her collar, and now director of the Northwest Veterans Alliance approached the podium. She carried a small binder of notes bound in dark leather. "Good morning," she began, her voice warm and measured, "and thank you for joining us at the dedication of the Edric Hale Veterans Heritage Corner. This is more than a memorial. It is a living testament to one man's steadfast courage and to all who choose presence over indifference." Her words were met with respectful applause. Ethan glanced across the sea of faces: airline staff, uniformed TSA agents, a handful of politicians from King County, and an unexpected visitor, Sergeant Major Redhe. Leonard Calloway, who approached from the back, cane in hand, silver braid on his right shoulder, signifying his long service in the Pacific. His eyes shone as he neared the display. Ethan offered him a seat at the front row, and Calloway accepted, then tapped the folded flag case with reverence. "Permission to speak?" Admiral Calloway asked. With a gracious nod, she ceded the podium. He cleared his throat, voice graveled but steady. "Seaman First Class Hale was more than a shipmate, he was my brother. In the summer of 1968, under the burning sun of South Vietnam, he carried my name home in his heart. It is fitting that travelers here at the gateway to the Pacific Northwest hear his story. May this corner remind each of us that when we pause, even for a moment, we can change lives." Calloway's words resonated in the open space. Children pressed their faces to the glass of the display, and one young boy whispered, "Is that a real flag?" The kiosk lit up, inviting touch. "Press here to hear Taps" played at Gate 7, June 14, 2024. Passengers trickled forward, placing headphones to their ears, and iodine-bright notes drifted through the terminal like a benediction. After Calloway stepped down, Admiral Ruiz returned to the podium. "Ethan Marshall has been instrumental in transforming a moment of kindness into a permanent legacy," she said, gesturing to him. Ethan felt a gentle heat in his cheeks. He rose, smoothing his tie, and approached the microphone. "I never set out to build a memorial," he began, voice quiet but clear, "but after I missed that flight and knelt beside Edric, I understood that compassion can't be scheduled. This Heritage Corner is for every veteran who slipped through the cracks and for every traveler who chooses to see them. Thank you to everyone who donated time, resources, and stories to make this possible." He looked toward Calloway, who nodded. Across the concourse, the general who'd knelt at Gate 7 6 months earlier watched from a distance in civilian clothes, flanked by 2 officers. Their respectful posture spoke without words the project was worthy. Ethan stepped down as the display case's lights dimmed, then shifted to the side. Admiral Ruiz approached, placing a folded program in his hand, an invitation to the inaugural Veterans Voices lecture series beginning next week at the Seattle Public Library. The program bore the same logo. The 13 triangle motif of the flag folds with the words, "Folded Stories Lessons in Presence Beneath." The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence. Gate announcements fell away. Even the hum of escalators softened as travelers bowed their heads. Then quietly, one by one, visitors approached the display. An elderly woman in a flight attendant's uniform kissed her fingertips and pressed them to the glass. A pair of business travelers, tall and brisk, placed their hands over their hearts. A veteran in a Marine Corps ball cap lingered long enough to leave a single crimson poppy beside the plaque. Ethan noticed a line forming at the kiosk, so he joined it. As he stood behind a mother and her daughter, he watched the girl's eyes widen when Edric's voice emerged. "We stood on that bridge. We saluted at dusk. We wondered if the world would ever notice." The mother closed her eyes, a tear tracing down her cheek. When it was his turn, Ethan pressed play and listened again to the recorded taps from Gate 7. He felt Edric's memory wash through him, not as duty, but as gratitude. He straightened, then turned and caught sight of his own reflection in the polished steel column. The coin he wore on a lapel pin gleamed. When no one is watching is when it matters most. Across the terminal, a small group was gathering signatures on a petition to expand similar heritage corners to other airports in the state: Tacoma, Spokane, Portland, and to fund annual scholarships in Edric's name for underprivileged engineering students. Admiral Ruiz had already pledged support, and Senator Monique Langley from Olympia was scheduled to introduce the bill next month. Ethan paused as an older couple approached him. The man extended a hand and said, "Thank you, Mr. Marshall. You changed my life today." Ethan shook his hand, then nodded at the display. He changed all our lives, he replied. Later that afternoon, as light slanted golden through the concourse windows, Ethan returned to Gate 7, the place where it had all begun. The chairs were the same, the scanner in the same spot, but now a small brass plaque was affixed to the wall. Gate 7, where one man paused so another could breathe. June 14th, 2024. He ran a fingertip over the cool metal, then reached into his coat pocket. His fingers closed around the worn paper scrap Edric had pressed into his hand. I saw you before they did, and he felt a familiar, quiet pride. Ethan lowered his hand, tucking both the coin and the paper back into his pocket. He breathed deeply, the hum of travelers once again buzzing around him. He glanced up at the departure board and then back at the plaque, realizing that every flight, every delay, every choice mattered. And somewhere beyond the glass doors, people would continue to walk, by either looking away or choosing to notice. He stepped back into the flow of passengers, carrying with him a legacy more enduring than any itinerary, a lesson in presence that would live on long after gates closed and announcements faded.